Good morning. There are certain questions, certain kind of elements of a conversation, a dialogue, that need to be clarified because we are in the age of scarcity and abundance, and none of them are useful or helpful in restoring our inner peace, being uh, a being, a living creature, as opposed to just merely functioning and existing without consciousness. Whether we like it or not, human beings are destined to live with their own consciousness, with a degree of uncertainty, in a dynamic relationship through their connections, whether they like it or not. Many people have chosen to ignore the world around them. Their pain is unbelievable. It's like excruciating, yet unheard, unseen, and they also lose their gravity, not only trust, from all of their connections, ending up being alone, which is again not compatible with human life at this time. If there is a sentence in any situation, any relating, any conversation, let that be a romantic partner, family member, workplace colleague, school environment, mates, anything, any of those, or even with ourselves, when there is that sentence, I disagree, but there is no continuation to that, or no emotions, feelings, thoughts being shared, nor time out was asked for with the promise being kept, that actually that conversation will continue at a certain time. That means rejection. Moreover, oftentimes, more often than not, that also means the other party to whom this sentence is addressed to is a burden that really, really erodes trust and really challenges loyalty between two people. If I may just refer back to some earlier content, that trust and loyalty seem to be working differently depending on the sex of an individual, male or female, or anything in between. But I'm not talking about gender, I'm talking about sex. So it works differently. Trust is something that seems to be building up and eroding gradually when it comes to males, but loyalty seems to be something of a binary kind of thing. Either is or isn't. And I'm not 100% sure yet, but it appears to me that with female sex it's probably working the other way around. So this is important, what the sentences are, how we respond to things, either to ourselves, within ourselves, or to the world around us, to the people in the connections we have. What's that running commentary in our head? Because that can influence widely how we feel and what the life experience will be. Nobody should ever forget that predominantly the quality of life, the experience of quality of life, is determined by the quality of relationships somebody has with others and with themselves in the first place. There is an abundance of assumptions these days that are no longer necessary to make. And when we use assumptions instead of facts, when we don't have the courage to actually check out information either about ourselves, to check out the picture we have about ourselves, how realistic is that? Bearing in mind, just because something was realistic in the past, it may not be realistic in the future. That's not a promise. The only thing when we get it right in the past things, that's just only enough to encourage us to try. But that does not give any guarantee in the future we will be absolutely and totally okay or fine. So we must not get complacent. And these are the words I'm using. These are not based on various theories, psychological models, or what have you. But we're looking at various hormones, neurotransmitters, chemicals in the body. So it's just sheer physiology. And who knows me well, or who knows me a little bit more than just the surface, then they know that I always had doubts about models, and always had doubts about theories, ideas, policies, dogmas, what have you. Doubts, but did not reject them. However, I just used them as they were. Usually these things are our ways of trying to find a mutual language we understand mutually. Also to have some simplistic, sometimes oversimplistic way of understand the dynamic. But these are only models, these are only ideas, these are only frameworks, but not the entirety of life. Life which is subject to time. The least known feature, power, force of our universe. Very few things we know about. One of them is that only it flows in one direction. And the other thing is it's pervasive, it goes through everything and anything, as entropy shows quite nicely. I don't know but for instance, entropy is caused by the force or the power of time, or that's just something we can assume, but we don't really know what's there because it's in the invisible domain. So once again, if there is this sentence, I disagree, but there is no sharing of emotions, feelings, thoughts, nor time out asked for, with the kept promise of coming back to this thing, whatever triggered it, and meaningfully continue that interaction or conversation. That not only means rejecting, but also means regarding either the other person or even ourselves as a burden. And that's distorting the balance because it's causing an abundance of negativism and conversely a scarcity of being positive about things. Important to know, when we try to manage scarcity with abundance, that's equally toxic because it's creating a very fragile, brittle system, a brittle balance that has very narrow bandwidth, as it were, and its ability the reserves in it to understand, to learn, to tolerate, to grow from the situation is nearing zero. So for the scarcity, abundance is equally a big problem. No, to manage either scarcity or abundance, what we need is enough. Being, doing enough. Not more, not less. And of course thinking, because after all, our species is being called the Homo sapiens, the thinking human. So we need to think. It's high time to individuals, particularly women, to start to get to know themselves, particularly dissociation. And we must not pathologize dissociating, either depersonalization or derealization, because that's an important skill and coping mechanism. One of the big things behind nurses shortage in most, well, if not all of the westernized and developed countries is that we ignored that important skill. And my personal view on this, intensive care nurses has a very well developed set of skills with this. The other ones would be probably emergency care, but that's not the same across the globe. So I would say intensive care or critical care nurses, or high acuity and high degree of time sensitivity areas, like interventional radiology, so on and so forth. These would be the areas where we can learn a lot. But the ball is in the court of women. right now, mostly. Not exclusively, but mostly. So we need to be inclusive, we need to be enough in order to be sustainable. I don't know, I have no way of knowing whether approaching things with this exclusion thing and arriving to a certain result, or being as much inclusive as possible and aiming for to be enough, is better or worse. This is not a quality judgment, but what seems to be the case, going around the ways we used to do and ignoring things of reality, taking things out of the fabric of reality, is no longer sustainable. And that's the main thing. That's the most important thing. Somehow people doesn't seem to be understanding it. The presence of humans on planet Earth is not necessary. The presence of having two sexes, male, female, not necessary. Let's take it from there and pay attention to evolution, pay attention to things like life expectancy at birth, which is in the UK is actually decreasing since 2012. And there's something else very worrying statistics in the UK. Since 2012, those girls or females or ladies or women who are able to conceive, that age range, I think it's between the 16 to 45 or something similar, the age range, the finished, i.e. successful suicide, had an increase of or more than 10 times in the past decade. That's worrying. That's our future. They no longer think they can live. And I think that's very concerning. We don't get something right. History does not repeat itself, ever. We've got that sensation. That means we didn't do things right. So let's think differently. Let's approach things differently. Let's converse. Do not create a political case from everything. Do not get oversensitive about things. Moreover, do not become solicitors or lawyers or defenders of ideas. We have nothing to do with it. Just stand up for ourselves and think that once again, in that case, we don't become, even to ourselves, a burden, and we won't experience rejection all the time. By the way, when we are too negativistic and experiencing rejection, that will have an impact on how we see the world. But that depends on the culture, the cultural roots we are coming from. If that's a culture which works by based on a sort of islander approach to things, exceptionalism, avoidance, then it means the life will become so extreme. Opportunities become much more inflated, and we miss them. So the pain and then the consequence of it will be detrimental on the individual and the community, the fabric of society, and its cohesive forces like trust, loyalty, even beliefs. On the other hand, if somebody is coming from a culture which is inferior, so they don't think they're good enough, they won't try, they won't see opportunities. Belonging always comes with inherent loss of freedom. But the freedom is a skill. That's not a thing. So it has to have certain safeguards that are rooted in our culture. Shame, for instance, is an important safeguard. Do not throw it away, do not fight it, include it, respect it. And most importantly, all of us need to know ourselves better in order to be able to live a life, not just merely exist these days. Once again, I never ever expected I would need to deal with these things. Not just as a nurse, but as a human being. That would be my job at some point. But it seems to be that's the most important thing. And these recordings are still about trying to understand each other better, have anchors to reality in any given time. So whenever this content is being watched, reflected on, or just revisited, time needs to be taken into account when it comes to the interpretation of things, or even constructing meaning to anything. Have a nice day. My voice is a little bit coarse this morning. I had a bit of a cough yesterday. It was very windy. Today is 10th of November 2023. This is the morning, and I'm at Battersea Power Station. Again, an indoors recording because the weather outside is quite something. So, continuation in Hungarian language will follow, of course.